welcome on into another episode of the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malamud here again with Zach Malamud. And Zach, after a UEFA Super Cup victory, how are you feeling there?
Go City. Very, very happy right now. And we got some big news this week in football, and really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, so let's break some football down on this side of the pond. We have some actual news going down as the preseason has opened up. We have some actual games being played. We start out in New York, New Jersey. Dalvin Cook signing a 1-year, $8.6 million deal with the New York Jets. Zach, let's just talk about this. I mean, we spoke about it a little bit last week, but just from the impact of Dalvin Cook alone, it's an interesting situation now. Breece Hall off of the PUP list, and he seems to be practicing well. And, you know, it kind of gives them a little bit of a buffer period where they don't really have to rush him back.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, but obviously, like, the talent, there's nothing else to talk about when it comes to Dalvin Cook. I mean, the number 2 on the board in scrimmage yards the last 6 years. He's only behind Derrick Henry in that span. I mean, Dalvin Cook, you know what you're going to get. He's a really talented running back, has done a bit of everything in his time in Minnesota. And, I mean, he's going to come into the Jets system. He's not going to be the clear running back 1. But, I mean, there's a chance he could do that early in this season while Breece Hall is still coming back from that torn ACL. But obviously the talent is there. It's a great move for the Jets because they add another piece to that backfield where now, like I said, they don't have to rush Breece Hall, very young, still a lot of time in the NFL. They don't have to rush him back from a really serious injury last season.
Yeah, I really think that what this will do is, and granted that Dalvin is in shape and, you know, he's ready to roll, and he's coming off a shoulder surgery, so that's an interesting question mark there. They said when he signed the contract, he was going to miss a week. And then unrelated to his shoulder injury, he's also having a child. And so congratulations to him. He signs his contract today. He heads back down to Florida. He's going to get to witness the birth of his first child. So that's really cool. But, you know, as far as the football goes, he's coming back from injury. And so he's apparently going to be ready to go. Breece, on the other hand, you know, he's just been rehabbing really. And yeah, he's been running, and they've been talking about the GPS stats and all of that. I'm not sure how fast he's going to get back to his workload. I think that this could be a Dalvin Cook backfield pretty early. And obviously, you know, you have some other guys there. Izzy Abanikanda has been helping out. We'll see if Bam Knight or Michael Carter makes the roster. I think that's an interesting case now that you have a Dalvin Cook in there. But it'll be interesting to see what happens as Breece gets healthy and what it's like towards the second half of the season. From a fantasy perspective, though, does this change Breece Hall's draft position?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I would move Breece Hall down on some boards. He's going, 3rd or 4th round, like right around that turn. I would push him down to maybe 5th or 6th round. I think that's probably the spot for him. And I think Dalvin Cook is going to end up going right around that spot as well. I think there's positives on both sides of this, Brett. I mean, you look at Dalvin Cook coming in. Yes, there's injury concerns to start the season, but you would think, I mean, if he's not ready really in the system by week 1, they have the last game of week 1 against the Bills on Monday night. If he's not ready completely week 1, then week 2 on, he'll probably be the number 1 guy. They'll get him in the system and fully rolling. I would say once it gets to around week 8, week 9, I think Breece Hall is going to really get into that workload that Dalvin Cook will have in the first 8 weeks or so of the season. So looking at that, I mean, you're looking forward to the fantasy playoffs. Will you have that key piece, that number 1 running back who I think I wouldn't be surprised, Brett, if it ended up turning into a Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon type of situation once we hit week 9, week 10. Aaron Jones, who takes probably 10 carries a game, but gets all of the receiving work. I think that translates to Breece Hall. And AJ Dillon, who will get those big carries between the tackles towards the goal line. I think that could turn into this situation in New York once we get to, like I said, around week 10 or so.
And it's interesting that you say that, because if you think back a couple episodes, we spoke about that pairing. And for the last, I believe it was 6 or 7 weeks of the season, it was a 50-50 split down the middle for Dillon and for Jones. And so I think that is a possibility there. And, Dalvin in the PPR game, I think that could be a helpful thing as well, as they start to use Breece more between the tackles. And I'm kind of curious where they use it, because they've been able to use both guys in the passing game. Dalvin has obviously made a name for himself, and then Breece Hall last year was really good in the passing game as well. So, I'm kind of curious where it lies, but yeah, I think I agree with the fact that Breece's value is definitely lower. He's going to slide down boards a bit. If you drafted already, don't panic on a Breece Hall thing, because I think he'll at least have, good value. He will score some touchdowns and things like that. If you pick Dalvin Cook, though, late, I think you're sitting in a pretty good situation right now. He was going in anywhere from the 8th to 10th round in every mock draft that I was doing. And so I think that that's a fair situation there. And in the next couple of weeks, he'll probably even slide up a bit.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, because I can talk about this for a couple of different guys. One guy I've thought about is Cooper Kupp. Whether the Rams are going to be full go this season, or he's going to sit out some games. They're not going to risk his health. I feel like if Dalvin Cook starts to go off early in the season, Brett, and Breece Hall's obviously not getting that full workload, I think Dalvin Cook in week 8 could be like a big trade target. I think you could get a lot of value for a guy like Dalvin Cook, just because people are going to see, oh, he's putting up those big numbers. And yeah, well, while we're sitting there knowing Breece Hall is going to come back, you might be able to get away with one. And Dalvin Cook goes to another team. You could get some good pieces to add to maybe a playoff type roster that you would have in fantasy this season. I would look forward to that for Dalvin Cook, just because I think Breece, like I said, once we get to the later stages and towards the playoffs, I think Breece Hall is going to really take over this backfield.
I know when you said trade Dalvin Cook, somebody's ears were ringing in one of our leagues that has been trying to trade for Dalvin Cook for quite a while. I agree with you. Listen, I think that Dalvin is one of those guys that he has name value just alone. And so I think that even makes it a higher value than just a regular, running back. It's a guy who finished in the top 5, how many years in a row. And so, yeah, I'm not saying that that's going to happen again this year, but at the same time, I think that, yeah, if he starts to get onto a roll, yeah, you probably could trade him knowing that Breece is going to come back and probably will split the carries 50-50.
Yeah. And just quickly, Brett, from the fantasy value standpoint in redraft and dynasty right now, I would put Dalvin RB2 conversation, probably nothing higher. I understand people are like, oh, well, he's got the backfield to himself. No, he doesn't. He's got 3 other guys there. One of them might get traded, whether it's Michael Carter or one of the other guys. They might offload a guy with Dalvin now there, but he's an RB2 right now in New York. They're still going to go heavy in the passing game. They got Aaron Rodgers as their quarterback. He's going to want to sling the ball around. It's not going to be a run-heavy type offense where Dalvin would be putting up big numbers in the first 8 weeks of the season. He's an RB2, and you probably drafted him assuming that he would end up being an RB2. Whether you picked him in the 6th, 7th, 8th round, you knew that you had some more reliable guys ahead of him.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting here is, we talked about the last couple of years of the Jets and how they come from Robert Saleh and the Shanahan offense. They like to rotate their running backs. Now Nathaniel Hackett's there, and he liked to rotate his running backs as well. And so when he was out in Denver, Melvin Gordon and the likes with obviously Javonte. But I think that that's an interesting point there. I know that they'll probably keep Izzy Abanikanda. They just drafted him this past season. And so you'd figure that him and Breece and Dalvin will be there. And so you probably have room for maybe one more. And so that's the interesting thing. Do you keep Bam Knight or do you keep Michael Carter? And what's the effect on the offense and the fantasy perspective on that? That I think is going to be the most interesting part of who they cut or trade or whatnot.
Yeah, quite interesting, and we'll see what happens with the Jets, whether it's Bam Knight or Michael Carter. I think Carter has a little bit more value, and teams would probably go for him a little bit more around the NFL.
Yeah, now I'm going to surprise you here because we have some breaking news actually, and Treylon Burks went down in practice on a 60-yard bomb. Comes out here from Ian Rappaport, NFL Network insider. He suffered an LCL sprain during practice, which keeps him out only a few weeks. So immediately, everybody thought, wow, done for the year, and on to the show of D Hop, and now it seems he's only out for a few weeks. Zach, so what do you think the impact is on this potential injury, and the sense that it could potentially linger into the season?
Yeah, I mean, you would probably say right now, very lucky. I think would be the biggest thing for Treylon Burks. Obviously, you see a guy go off in the middle of training camp on a cart. Especially, everybody goes onto a cart. We knew that. We found that out the other day. Every single person, they just don't want to risk an injury whatsoever, so they all go out on a cart. And I mean, Treylon Burks is the latest to go out. Obviously, now only a few weeks. That's good news for fantasy owners as well as Treylon Burks. And for D Hop, I think it meant the same, really. I think he's going to be the number one guy. I didn't think Treylon Burks would take into his workload a ton in Tennessee, just based on this offense is going to run through Derrick Henry. And then everything else is going to be, whether it's DeAndre Hopkins, he's the number one target. They're going to have to go to him, or Chigakonkwo, the tight end this year, or their backup wide receiver in Treylon Burks. I think there's not a ton there outside of Hopkins and Okonkwo and Derrick Henry, but I think Treylon Burks is a good option to have, a late round flyer, most likely. I mean, you could take him maybe 9th round. I would probably say is the earliest. He's a bench guy right now because you don't know what's going to happen. In that case, if DeAndre Hopkins picks up an injury, Chigakonkwo picks up an injury, then you say, okay, Treylon Burks' value will go up, and they'll throw to him a little bit more. But right now, not much when it comes to DeAndre Hopkins and Chigakonkwo value moving any bit of sorts with Treylon Burks now out a couple weeks.
Yeah, and I think that, again, the interesting thing is we're now 3 weeks away from the season, and so whether that does linger into the season or he misses a week or two early, that could potentially lead to, listen, D Hop's getting more targets in the first 2 weeks, and all of a sudden he's the obviously favorite target, and that kind of doesn't really go away. We've seen that in the last couple of years with some guys, and so there's the potential that happens. That said, Treylon Burks, I think that he's also in a situation where, they're going to be putting their best cornerback on D Hop, and so it does free him up. And so, yeah, I think that late round flyer is intriguing. I know he almost fell to me in a draft, and I considered taking him there and ended up opting for other options. But I think that, Treylon Burks is one of those sleeper targets that you could potentially take in your draft.
Yeah, and it also, if Treylon Burks gets that injury, it also puts Nick Westbrook-Akina on the radar. He's the third guy. He would move up to number 2. Not a ton of fantasy value, but a guy maybe to hold on your bench and see if something happens throughout the year that has a spark between Tannehill and Nick Westbrook-Akina.
Yeah, definitely avoided the absolute worst of cases there for Treylon Burks, though, with only an LCL sprain. And he is only going to be out a few weeks rather than the full season. And so now we go back to some news from the last couple of days, and it's Ezekiel Elliott. He signs a 1-year, $6 million deal with the New England Patriots. Zach, is this going to eat into Ramondre Stevenson's workload, or are we going to see one of those 5 carries for 1 yard and 3 touchdowns?
So it's weird because I feel like Zeke's going to have that kind of workload, like a 5 carries, 3 touchdowns. You're like, oh, darn it. What are we doing here? Why is Ramondre not getting that workload? I feel like maybe the last couple of weeks, it's changed my opinion a little bit. I don't know if there's a huge drop in the rankings for Ramondre now because Zeke comes in. I mean, in ESPN, he went from RB12 to RB15. There's still a clear avenue right now for Ramondre Stevenson to be a top 10 running back. And it's as long as there's touchdown production, whether that's in the receiving game. He could still come out of the backfield. He's going to be the receiving back. He could still get some touchdowns from there. And I mean, Ramondre had 6 touchdowns last season. That was with Damian Harris and some other running backs also getting those touchdowns out of the backfield. So obviously, I think Zeke is going to eat into that and get some of those touchdowns. But I feel like I don't know if there's a huge drop off for Ramondre because I know the volume's going to be there. Would I take him in the second round or early third round? Probably not. I'd stay away. I think there's better options. But I feel like in the last couple of weeks, I don't know what's happened, Brett, but I feel like Ramondre is still going to get that volume in that New England offense. And the touchdowns, if he gets 4 or 5 touchdowns, I'm very happy because Ramondre was a top 7 running back with just 6 touchdowns last season.
Yeah. So for me, I don't know that Zeke is anything more than a handcuff to Ramondre. I think that if you have Ramondre, you probably can grab Zeke late in the draft just to make sure that you have that guy and use it as the protection. There's going to be the occasional spiked weeks in production when he falls in the end zone. Again, like we said, 5 carries, 3 touchdowns for like a yard. And you're like, what happened? Where did Ramondre's things go? But ladies and gentlemen, I think that we have discovered the vulture of the season. It's going to be Zeke Elliott. I think that once they get within the 10-yard line, I think they're going to just give the ball to Zeke. I think that that's what's going to be, what's going to happen. And I'm not sure that that's going to cause that much of a decline in Ramondre because Ramondre is pretty good in open space. I think that that's been proven. And so he'll score a lot of touchdowns from outside the 10-yard line. But listen, once they get it down deep, I think that that's who they're going to give it to. I think it's going to be Zeke, and they're just going to try to pound it. So I think that's your vulture of the season. And again, I think that the offense in general, as we've spoken about the Patriots and as we went through each team, the Patriots are going to have an average at best offense. And so I'm not sure that I would take a chance on Zeke unless I had Ramondre on my team.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, Zeke is, like you said, he's the massive insurance back right now. For Ramondre, you got to go get Zeke. There's no other way to say it. I feel like Stevenson, like I said, I wouldn't take him second or third round. If he's sitting there late third round, early fourth round, I'll jump on him completely because I feel like I said, there's still an avenue to being a top 10 like he was last season. I understand Zeke right now. He's going to be the goal line back. He's a massive insurance back. You got to get him. And other than that, he's going to be on benches, I would say. But he's one Ramondre Stevenson injury away from being top 15 every single week. I think that's something to look at. And like I said, if you have Ramondre, you better find a way to go get Zeke Elliott right now.
Yeah, and I think that if you have already drafted your leagues and you don't have Zeke, then it's probably going to cost you. And that's the price you pay in fantasy. But right now, Zeke's a sell high candidate for me. I don't know that Zeke's going to really get any PPR work other than he's just going to score touchdowns and be a goal line back and be a vulture. I think Ramondre gets all that work. That said, definitely would recommend you getting both if you have Ramondre on your team.
Completely agree. I think this offense in this running back room, the volume is all Ramondre Stevenson.
All right, so now we go down to our favorite little debate here that we've had multiple times on this podcast. Let's break down the rookie quarterbacks. So we start out in Indianapolis, as this past week, Anthony Richardson was named the starter by Shane Steichen as he made, his debut. He was playing against the Bills defense. It was a big game, loud crowd in Buffalo. And, he kind of made some pretty big mistakes early on. He took a, off the back foot, and just kind of flung one right to the defense and early interception. He kind of got himself composed a bit, threw a gorgeous pass to Alec Pierce that should have gone for a 34-yard touchdown that got dropped. But we also got to see a small taste of Anthony Richardson's rushing potential in the game. He put his head down, tried to literally just crush a defender. So he finishes 7 of 12, 67 yards, 2 rushes for 7 yards. Zach, what did you make of this, early debut and then the fact that he got named the starter?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the one mistake is what people now look at, and that's going to overshadow really his debut. But I mean, 7 for 12, that's I mean, it's not great, but it's also what you're expecting. He's very young. He's got a lot of time. Accuracy was the problem coming out, and it's going to take him some time to get that going, especially now as the starter. I mean, I think it's a good start for a rookie, and being in that type of setting, that preseason opener. Obviously, the pick, he's going to want it back. But other than that, you can see the talent is definitely there from Richardson.
Yeah, it looked like he was looking for Isaiah McKenzie, and Isaiah McKenzie didn't really turn, and he just kind of flung it and wasn't looking at the receiver. So, bad mistake there by the quarterback. I think it was on both of them, really, because you saw Isaiah McKenzie get yelled at on the sideline right after that. But at the same time, Richardson, just rookie mistake. It happens. And, obviously, welcome to the NFL. Like, that's your first impression that people get of you now, is that he just kind of flung one to the defense. But that said, yeah, I think that he stayed kind of composed towards the end, and that was a little, good to see. And then obviously he flung that would have been 34-yard touchdown on what just looked like a beautiful play. Got dropped, but that kind of happens as well. And then he got named a starter. Listen, I think that's, to me, the biggest takeaway is that the coach had enough confidence after that performance to say, okay, he's our starting quarterback. He'll be okay. That to me ups his value a touch. Only because I was not sure that he was going to be the starter for the entire season. So for me, it ups it a touch. Obviously, we spoke about where we're having him in our rankings. I'm not sure that he's still going to be a top 10, like some people are saying. Some people are saying top 12. I don't know that he'll have that number. That said, if the rushing ability comes and Jonathan Taylor is not there, which I think is the biggest point, if Jonathan Taylor is not there, then I can see it. But I don't know that I could see it with Jonathan Taylor there. It is worth noting Jonathan Taylor was back with the team till today, and then about a half hour ago, the Colts released a short statement. Jonathan Taylor returned to Indianapolis to continue his rehab. However, he had a personal matter arise. He's not currently with the team. His absence is excused. It comes out from ESPN that it had nothing to do with a contract extension, and the dispute continues, though, with the contract, and I'm sure it'll linger for the next couple of weeks at least. And obviously, we spoke last week about Jim Irsay, so go check out that episode. But, Zach, what do you think of the potential of Richardson without Jonathan Taylor?
I mean, I think there's potential there. I also can see from the standpoint, yes, Jonathan Taylor was going to get that workload, and he was going to get over 20 carries a game. You could see that. I don't know if in Anthony Richardson's rookie year that the Colts will say, okay, Jonathan Taylor's not there. Let's give some of those carries now to Anthony Richardson, because I feel like a young quarterback in that spot, especially with how bad this Colts roster kind of looks at some parts of it, I feel like they may shy away from putting him in a lot of danger. I think they may shy away of giving him those rushing plays. There's going to be those opportunities, but I don't know if that all of a sudden rises because Jonathan Taylor's not there. I feel like they're still going to ride some of those running backs that they have, because they got a lot of young ones there. And now with Zach Moss out, Kenyon Drake can come in. He's an experienced back. I feel like there's the positives, and obviously it could happen with Taylor out, but I shy away a tiny bit just because, like I said, I don't know if they're going to want to put him in a ton of risk in just his rookie year.
Yeah, I agree, because I think that, without Jonathan Taylor, then Anthony Richardson kind of becomes the focal point of that offense. And that's a little scary if you're coming in as a rookie, and we've seen rookies that have done that and just failed. Some rookie quarterbacks that got thrown into the fire. And we'll talk about the other two in a minute who also look like they're going to be the starters as well. But, I mean, you and I spoke the other day about Zach Wilson and how he just kind of got thrown in to the fire on a not great team, and see what the result was. Obviously, he came in talented and all of that, and sky was the limit. But when you're just getting thrown into the fire and you're the focal point of the offense as a rookie, you're being forced to make plays, and you're being criticized when you don't. So I'm not sure that Anthony Richardson's going to have that, because I think Jonathan Taylor eventually will come back and play. But but it is an interesting note just to, think about, as obviously we don't really know what's going to happen with this Jonathan Taylor situation.
Yeah, completely. And as for Richardson getting named the starter, I'm really not too worried about it. I don't think they're when it comes to him being rushed in. I mean, I just look at where he was drafted, really early in the draft, a top 5 pick, top 3 pick. Like he's got to be in there, and they're gonna trust him and ride with him. Obviously, Gardner Minshew's there. I don't know if that's doing anything, helping him develop if he's sitting behind Gardner Minshew. I feel like getting him those NFL reps right away is going to be the way to go. And I could say that for all 3 of the rookie quarterbacks, Richardson, Young, and Stroud.
Yeah, not that they care about our fantasy football teams at all, because they don't, the coaches, but I think that it gives them a better chance to win. And so I think that that's where the situation comes in. And so, taking the guy who's a playmaker, I think that that's pretty important. But yeah, not that they care about our fantasy football teams at all. I do think that, like I said, I think that Anthony Richardson being named the starter before the season starts does up his value a touch rather than coming in week 5, week 6.
That's true. I agree.
All right, so now we get to our next one, and it was Bryce Young. He goes up against the Jets, who shut him out 27-0. Bryce goes 4 of 6, 21 yards. He took a sack. He got hit a lot early in the game. No big plays, no major mistakes, though, against what was a kind of scary-looking Jets front.
Yeah, and that's the thing that really stands out. Yeah, obviously, it's preseason. It's his first start. Like, Bryce Young had a really solid game for what he was going up against. A young quarterback with a team around him that's really not that good. Carolina's going to struggle a little bit when it comes to that. They're still rebuilding around him. Up against arguably the best defense in the NFL in the New York Jets, and they gave him a hard time. They're going to try and bump into him, bother him any way they possibly can. And he didn't make any mistakes. And I think that's the biggest thing about Bryce Young. He doesn't make mistakes. He's very smart. His IQ is the best of the quarterbacks in the draft by far. I think it's not even close. And that's what stands out. That's why he's the number 1 overall pick. I think he had a solid debut. Basically, with what's around him, you can't expect much more from a young quarterback.
Yeah, and again, it's preseason week 1, and so, it's not like he was going up against Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner and those kind of guys. But, I mean, make no mistake, those guys that are sitting behind them, I mean, we're talking about Jermaine Johnson, who was picked in the first round, and, guys like that, who it was a pretty scary front for the Jets. And yeah, they got a lot of hits on him, and he kind of seemed composed about it, and that was kind of cool to watch. It just was like, okay, he's ready for this, and I think that he brings, listen, I said it a couple weeks ago, I think he brings solid quarterback 2 potential. He could end up being your second quarterback in Superflex, and I would have no problem with it at all. We spoke about how some of those weapons are reliable, and so I think that he'll start to form some chemistries with the guys, the Adam Thielens of the world, and I do think that he will have a good season. Obviously, it's not going to be a great season, and I'm not expecting him to be like, the top guy in the history of rookie quarterbacks, but I think he'll be a solid quarterback option. I think he'll get them some touchdowns. And, obviously if you own him in a dynasty league, you had to, get him up high. And he, obviously we spoke about it. I think he still has proven that he is going to be the top rookie quarterback.
Yeah, and it just stands out. Like, this doesn't really surprise me from Bryce Young. Obviously, the quarterback of Alabama, he's won national championships, and he's gone up in the SEC against who knows how many top prospects, defenses that are full of them. He's going up against Georgia all the time. Like, this guy has been through it and has exceeded expectations in his time at Alabama. Obviously, it's a little different once you head into the pros, but this guy has done a lot in college that really now it doesn't really surprise me if he's going to be successful on the Carolina Panthers this year.
Yeah, so now let's get into our third quarterback. And, the first 2, Young and Richardson, have already been named the starters. CJ Stroud has not been named the starter yet. However, he seems to be taking every first team rep, and it's appearing that way, that he's played only with starters and not with backups. And so we're guessing that CJ Stroud will end up being the starter for the Houston Texans this year. He didn't have that great of a game. He finished 2 for 4, 13 yards, forced the ball into coverage, was intercepted. He didn't get much help from his line. He got banged around a lot. Zach, what do you take out of a first? Obviously, it's first week of the preseason, but a bit of a struggle here for CJ Stroud.
So I feel like the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway we could take from these three guys, you can see the weaknesses. They're right out for you to see what they need to work on when it comes to Richardson, accuracy, and getting that completion percentage up. Bryce Young, trying to avoid and just finding a couple more big type plays. When it comes to CJ Stroud, it's decision making, and I've said this countless amount of times since he's been drafted. The decision making, obviously, forced the ball into coverage right to the defender. Maybe it was a miscommunication with his wide receiver, but that's something he needs to work on in the NFL. And the Patriots defense did not make it easy for him. They were sending everything for him. He got hit a couple of times. You're, all right, watch out. So I feel like it's don't take too much from it. Obviously, it's preseason and it's the Patriots. They're a really good defense, but I think he's got some time to learn and develop. But I feel like having him as the number one, I don't think Davis Mills is going to help CJ Stroud all of a sudden start to develop. I feel like CJ Stroud, the best way for him to develop is getting those reps in the NFL, and he can get things going in that system and really learn from the guys around him, build that chemistry with his wide receivers. And you can only do that with the reps that you get in an actual game, in a preseason game.
Yeah, I think that we watched that game together, and if you watch that playback, it was Tank Dell, and we'll talk about Tank Dell in a little bit, but it was Tank Dell. He faked the defender out of his shoes and turned around for the ball, and the safety jumped the route, and it was a good play by the safety. But at the same time, he didn't see the safety at all, and he decided he needed to throw it into double coverage, and one of the defenders fell down, but the other one jumped the route. And so Stroud will learn, but at the same time, I agree with you. I think that the decision making was pretty out there, especially when you look at the play in slow motion where everybody was, and he shouldn't have forced the ball into there. And I agree with what you said before. All three of these quarterbacks, it was very easy to figure out what their weakness was and how they can avoid that. And so for me, I'm taking a pass on CJ Stroud this year as far as, fantasy goes. Obviously, dynasty is a different perspective where, you figure out where he's going to be in a couple of years. And I still think that that's probably the only place you'd be drafting him right now. Probably not taking him in a redraft setting. Unless you are in a very deep superflex league.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the other two I'd maybe take a shot on, but I'm also not crazy confident in any of these guys. But if I was going to take a shot, probably Richardson over Young because of the rushing ability in that offense in Indy. But I feel like Bryce Young could also be a really solid backup for 1 or 2 weeks when you need them and you're starting guys on a bye.
All right, so now let's get into the rest of the preseason as we start to break down some of these other games, and we're going to start here with the Eagles. And I think this was an interesting perspective here. The Eagles, it was weird to me because Kenneth Gainwell, he rested with the starters. It came right before that he was going to have a feature back role, and then Swift and Penny were kind of battling for the backup job, and so Swift started, Penny played into the second quarter, and Gainwell didn't play at all, and he rested with the starters. Do you make anything of this at all?
I do a tiny bit, I'm going to say. I think that Gainwell is the one of these three that has been in this system. He's comfortable in this system. Obviously, last year, went all the way to the Super Bowl with this team. Yes, he wasn't the number one, but he was maybe the number two behind Miles Sanders last season. I think it kind of shows like they're trying to still teach Swift and Penny. But when it comes to redraft value, I feel like any three of these guys, Gainwell, Swift, and Penny, I don't think they're anything more than flex plays in my mind. I think that's probably the comfortable spot for them, whether one's on the bench or but you're going to take them in consideration as a flex each and every week. You're not going to feel comfortable though with a guy like DeAndre Swift as your running back too. That's just not going to work for you. I don't recommend that heading into this season. I would say all of these guys should be rostered in Dynasty. I think that's very important because Swift and Gainwell are both 24, so they're very young. Penny a little bit older than that. I think he's 27. But I mean, Penny, you hold on to him and see what goes on this year. Most likely, if you're in maybe win now mode, you take a shot on Rashad Penny in Dynasty. I feel like Gainwell and Swift are guys you can hold on to. I do think people were a little bit frustrated, DeAndre Swift owners, that he went to Philadelphia in a crowded backfield. See what you could get for him. He has a lot of value. He's only 24 years old. Shop him on the market. And if you could get something good for DeAndre Swift, because people still value him very highly, they may say, oh, he's the number one in Philly. You don't know that right now. See what you could get for him in the market.
So it's interesting because here's how I took it. Penny and Swift, both newer to the system than Kenneth Gainwell. They kind of need to learn the system a little more. Gainwell is going to have a role, though, in this. That said, I'm a little scared of all of them. And, Swift is injury prone. Penny's injury prone. Gainwell could potentially be the guy. And so there is that late round flyer, like light bulb that goes off of taking a shot on Kenneth Gainwell because you can basically get him for free. He's the last round pick. He's not going in a lot of drafts. And so, yeah, there's the potential that you take that for free. And then, if it doesn't work out, you just drop him and pick someone up on waivers. The Penny Swift thing really does scare me, though. And so, yeah, I think that both of them actually have sell value right now. And yeah, I would roster all of them in a dynasty league. But as far as redraft goes, I don't know. I think the Gainwell is worth the dart throw because I think he'll have at least a third of the workload, if not more.
Yeah, and I can understand why people would go towards Swift because the receiving value out of the backfield, that's really all he did in his time in Detroit. Like, yes, he got those carries every now and then and bursted out with one. But, I mean, he got a lot of the receiving work. And that's really what made him successful last year, especially with Jamal Williams getting all the touchdowns, the rushing value there. I mean, I think Swift, the receiving ability out of the backfield is something to look at. And I would see why people are definitely intrigued by drafting him. But like I said, he's nothing more than a flex play in my mind.
All right, so now let's jump over to what seems to be a more settled backfield situation, at least from the outside looking in, and we'll see how it actually comes out to be. But it was Jahmyr Gibbs. Is he a PPR monster? He carried the ball 6 times for 19 yards. He only hauled in one target, though, for 18 yards. But the 18-yard pass really looked like, okay, he's going to be this PPR guy.
And if that's the story, then I will be a very happy man, Brett, because I've had 2 fantasy drafts so far, and my RB2 in both of them is Jahmyr Gibbs. So I would be very happy with that. But you can see the Alvin Kamara type value. We talked about it all that time, and he was coming out of college, and that was the comparison. You saw it on one play, the reception for 18 yards. I think that's going to come a lot more in this season. It was all in the first quarter that he played. He had 6 carries for 19 yards and a reception for 18 yards. That's solid in what you're asking for Jahmyr Gibbs. You know he's not going to get a ton of carries. I mean, he's going to get some, but you know that David Montgomery is going to be the rushing down back, and he's going to get those carries. You're looking forward to that DeAndre Swift role from last year, but even a little bit more coming with the talent that Jahmyr Gibbs has. I mean, this guy could play wide receiver. So watch out for it. They're going to use him in all different kinds of ways. Very excited from what I saw from Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's going to be a guy to watch out for, and it proves where he's going in drafts right now in that third, fourth round. Like, go get him.
And
He's going to be a monster.
I'm happy you said that because he did line up as a wide receiver during the game. And, that was something that they spoke about early on. And so, yeah, I saw that 18-yard pass and, the catch and the run. And I was like, wow, this guy's going to be good. That was the immediate impact. And so, yeah, I think that Gibbs is a guy that I'm very high on. And we'll see what happens when Montgomery gets worked in with him and all of that. But, yeah, for the first impression, I thought that this could turn out to be one of those guys that's, the Kamara-esque kind of player with the PPR.
Yeah, completely agree.
All right, so we jump on to another rookie here. It was Jordan Addison. He caught one pass for 22 yards. However, he also made a highlight play early in the game, made a catch on the sideline. Looks like he had both feet down. They called it incomplete. Vikings decided they're not challenging. It's preseason. It doesn't really matter. But he did make the catch. He showed flashes of his upside. He's going into the 9th round, Zach. Do you think that is a fair value for him, or do you think this could be a higher value?
I feel like nothing. I mean, maybe around, maybe 8th round, you're saying, okay, I need a wide receiver. Let me take a shot on Jordan Addison, but I feel like that's probably the good spot for him. We talk about rookies, and rookies doesn't always mean success. That's one of your tips, Brett, and it shows in real life. It happens, and he played well. A reception for 22 yards, and then that other one that got ruled incomplete. 3 targets on the day for Jordan Addison. He's wide receiver 44 right now, so he's not going to be crazy high, but I do think he's going to be the second wide receiver in Minnesota. We know what that comes with. Justin Jefferson's going to get who knows how many targets this year. Kirk Cousins just going to be like, all right, I'm going to find Justin Jefferson wherever, similar to what happened last year. But then Addison comes in and gets those leftover targets. I think it's going to be a solid year. You could take a shot on him in the 9th round, maybe in the 8th. But nothing earlier than that, because I feel like there's better options ahead of him.
Yeah, for me, Addison's an interesting one. I grabbed him in the Dynasty League because I think it makes sense there. Redraft's interesting, though, because, I mean, he's been going as high as the 8th round, and I think there's some good options that you can pick instead of him. That said, I thought he did show a lot of promise. I'm curious to see what happens when Kirk Cousins ends up being the quarterback there. The other thing, it got reported today he's in concussion protocol. He could return as soon as Monday. I'm not sure that has really much effect because it's only a week's notice and whatever. But at the same time, listen, if he fell to me at the end of the 9th round, I would look at it. I would look at it pretty heavily. I think that you're getting great value there. That said, a lot of people are going to overreact over this highlight reel catch that didn't count and grab him around earlier. I'm not sure that really happens. And we've talked about, certain guys, and again, we're going to get to Tank Dell, but a lot of people who are kind of overreacting to that long bomb. He got picked up within a half hour of that game ending in our league to Tank Dell. And so, yeah, are people going to try to go early on Addison? Sure. You should just let them go early on Addison and grab whatever value drops.
Exactly.
All right, so now we go on to another rookie here. It was Zach Charbonnet. He got the start there in Seattle. He took 4 carries for 14 yards. He added 2 receptions for 14 yards. He was a very physical runner, though, and that's what I think we should have really taken away from this. A lot of toughness from him.
Yeah, I mean, at 4 carries, 14 yards, 2 receptions for 14 yards, all came in the first half. I mean, he was pretty good. I mean, it's early. Obviously, he's running back 41 right now. I think that's probably the good spot for him because of maybe that split backfield between him and Kenneth Walker the third. Kenneth Walker's out right now with an injury, a groin injury. He's still week to week, most likely going to come back pretty soon. And I think once they get to the regular season, you'll really see what's going on in that Seattle backfield. I spoken about this so many times. I wouldn't take Walker where he's getting taken right now in redraft, but I would take a shot on Charbonnet because it's what, 9th round, 10th round. I mean, if Kenneth Walker goes down, then Zach Charbonnet is all of a sudden a really valuable asset. So I'd take him where he's going, but I'd stay away from Walker. But I could see, yes, Walker is probably going to be the number one, and then Charbonnet will come in at number 2 and picking off some of those numbers that Walker could put up if he was the only one there.
Yeah, I can see something like a 60-40 split, or 65-35, something like that. Kind of a split. I think that's where you'll see it. We spoke about it last week on our redraft recap episode, where Kenneth Walker at the end of the 4th round was my pick because we were in a running back heavy league, and I made sure that I grabbed Charbonnet back end of the 10th round. And so, just to make sure that I had my bases covered. Listen, I don't know that I take much from this other than Charbonnet is really, really physical. And I think Pete Carroll is going to like that and kind of lead into that more. And so, I think that Charbonnet is going to play a significant role in this offense as they try to pound the rock and then kind of mix in the passing.
Yeah, I mean, the size really stood out, and that's the difference between Charbonnet and Walker. And you could see Charbonnet in that goal line type of situation. They may favor him a little bit more than Kenneth Walker, who is a little bit smaller than Charbonnet.
Yeah, so interested to see now what happens when Walker comes back and what happens to Charbonnet's role.
Yep, definitely.
All right, so now we jump over to some rookie tight ends, and it seemed that there were 3 of them that got all of the snaps with the starters. Dalton Kincaid gets 100% of the snaps with the Bill starters. Sam Laporta played 100% of the snaps with the Lions starters, and then it was Luke Musgrave who got 100% of the snaps with the Packers starters. 2nd-round pick over Tucker Kraft, who was the 3rd-round pick, tight end, and Musgrave gets 100% of the snaps with the Packers. Zach, what do you take away from these 3 guys?
So, I mean, Kincaid against the Colts, not targeted, but played 100% of the snaps. Like you said, Brett, I feel like that's probably what we expected. I think Kincaid maybe had a question mark with Dawson Knox. You don't draft a tight end in the 1st round like the Bills did if you're going to throw him on the bench and wait for him to develop. Like, this guy is going to get right into action. You saw what he could do at Utah last year. He's a very talented tight end. Maybe towards a wide receiver he could look more towards. But I feel like this doesn't surprise me. When it comes to Laporta, also doesn't surprise me. I've been talking about Sam Laporta for months and months and months. Drafted him in Dynasty myself. No receptions on 1 target against the Giants. There's just nobody else in Detroit. There's a couple names. Brock Wright is one of them, but they had a couple guys go out with injury, so that's still a question mark, but it's Sam Laporta's room. And then Luke Musgrave, probably, I would say, the most surprising because he's got another rookie right next to him in Tucker Kraft. You would maybe think they would split those snaps with the starters, but they favored Musgrave, and why not? He's tight end 35 right now in redraft. He had one reception for 8 yards on 3 targets. I mean, he's a very talented player, and that's why they drafted him in the 2nd round.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, Kincaid, not surprised. I mean, we knew that one was going to happen. They've just overhyped him. And we didn't really see anything from him, but that's okay. Listen, one preseason game, and obviously the backup's in there for most of the game, so that he didn't get a ton of work. Sam Laporta, though, we spoke about them a ton. So with Laporta, I think that's going to be a significant role. Also, just going back to Kincaid, it is worth mentioning that he did line up out wide. They threw him in motion. They threw him in the slot. That was something that they spoke about a ton. And so, there's that as well. But yeah, like you said, Luke Musgrave, I think, was the interesting one of the 3. I think he's going to have a nice target share here, actually. And like I said, clearly he's ahead of Tucker Kraft for the role. It's also worth noting that out of that game, the other takeaway I had was that Jaden Reed is going to be their slot receiver. Another rookie there, as you'll probably see Watson and Dobbs on the outside. with Jaden Reed there in the slot and Musgrave as the tight end. And so, that was my big takeaway just from the Packers standpoint. But yeah, I think that this is going to be one of those, late round flyer potential in a Luke Musgrave, and especially if you're playing in one of those deeper leagues and, higher teams, 14, 16 teams where those tight ends start to go. And, some teams take 2 tight ends. I think Luke Musgrave might be a guy you want to target.
Yeah, I mean, all 3 of these guys really some guys to look at as backups. They're nothing more than that. And late round flyers, and really looking at them. Kincaid a little bit earlier than the others. But Laporta's tight end 21, Musgrave tight end 35. Take a shot on them. Why not? Like, they're getting those snaps, and they're going to be with the starters. It just shows the value that these guys can have heading into this season.
Yeah, and I think from a dynasty perspective, we've spoken at length about Laporta and Kincaid, but Musgrave, Musgrave was like a mid-round pick. That could be good value there in a rookie draft.
Yeah, agree.
All right, so now we go to the guy we were talking about just a few minutes ago. It's Tank Dell. Are we buying or selling him? He had 5 catches for 65 yards and a pretty good-looking touchdown there.
It was a pretty good-looking touchdown. I won't bash him too much for maybe not catching it at first and then having to help himself out by catching it completely. But we'll forget about that. He caught the touchdown. He did a good job. I feel like people are reading a little bit too much into this. It's the first preseason game. He was with Stroud. Yes, Stroud could be it. I mean, Dell could be one of Stroud's favorite targets. But we've talked about Stroud and maybe not a very valuable guy in redraft this season. I think you could say the same about anything else in that Houston offense besides maybe Dameon Pierce. But even so, he has Devin Singletary behind him. I'm just staying away from this Houston offense. I don't know. Maybe take a late round flyer on Tank Dell, but he's wide receiver 3 at best in my mind. There's an argument for Woods, Collins, Mechie. Who knows? Like, I feel like wide receiver 3 in this Houston wide receiver room is the best spot for him. I don't know. What do you think, Brett?
Well, here's how I'll put it. Dynasty, go grab him. Go grab him. I think that he has proven that he's going to be a good NFL receiver. And he might not get the work now, but he will get the work. You saw the talent there. Redraft, it's a little interesting here. Like I said, he had 5 catches, 65 yards, and a touchdown. He played all but 1 snap with the starters. That said, temper your expectations there because they didn't play Robert Woods or Noah Brown in that game. They sat both of them. And so Dell's start might not mean that much. It was interesting, though, that he played ahead of John Mechie, though, in those 2 receiver sets. He lined up alongside Nico Collins, and then obviously when they played 3 wide receivers, they all were in. But it was Mechie who was the odd man out, and you don't know if that's because they're ramping Mechie back up or whatnot after he comes back from leukemia, and so you're not really sure what to read into that. I think that's a bigger question mark for me is what does this mean for John Mechie? But that said, listen, Stroud loved him, and he's spoken at length about it over the last couple months of how, he was on the phone with the GM and the GM asked about him and he gave him a glowing review and loved him and said, go get him. So listen, Tank Dell might be a thing. And I keep saying it to you this past week, Tank Dell might be a thing. Does it mean, that he's worth a last round target? Yeah, I think he's a good consideration for my last round pick target. I'm not sure he's much more than that right now. I need to see more.
That's fair. Tank Dell is a thing in the next couple of years. Yeah, so I'll say that. I don't think it's this year. It's Stroud's rookie year. I mean, what I'm expecting from Stroud, and it's not going to be anything spectacular. So I feel like the same has to be said for a guy like Tank Dell, especially in a crowded wide receiver room in Houston.
Yeah, again, I think Tank Dell might be a thing. Might be a thing this year. So listen, he might be a thing.
It's fair.
We'll see what happens. All right, so now we go to another team who's getting a lot of hype, based on their performance early on. It's the Chicago Bears. And their running back situation is interesting right now. Khalil Herbert, Roshan Johnson, Justin Fields had a great game, and that offense looked awesome. And everyone was like, Bears are going to the Super Bowl. I don't know if we're going to put that into the stretch after the first preseason game, but the Bears fans had a great time with it. Khalil Herbert versus Roshan Johnson, though, I think is what we have to talk about here. Herbert had one target, 56-yard touchdown. He had 15 rushing yards on 4 attempts, and he played with the starters. Roshan Johnson, he tallied 44 yards on 12 carries. He caught 3 of his 4 targets for 2 yards. But Johnson played behind Herbert, Foreman, and even Treston Ebner. Zach, do you make anything of that?
It's early. I mean, that's the biggest thing I'll say, and it shows that Herbert's the guy, and he's ranked that way for fantasy. He's ranked running back 30. Roshan Johnson's ranked running back 52. So the question is, it's Herbert's backfield. I mean, you can really see that. You also can see that he's most likely going to be the receiving back. He had that 1 reception, 56 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, that 56-yard play really stands out, that this guy is a real problem out of the backfield when it comes to receiving downs. I feel like when it comes to Johnson, he's the insurance guy for Herbert. Like, if you're grabbing Herbert, maybe you take your last pick. You grab a guy like Roshan Johnson, because you never know. But I feel like Herbert's your running back 3, running back 4. Like, he's not going to be anything higher than that. I would feel comfortable with other guys ahead. Dynasty, you drafted Roshan Johnson. Hold on to him. I think he's going to be a really talented player, and you saw that in his time at Texas. He was behind Bijan Robinson all those times and still managed to be one of those top picks in the draft and one of the first couple of running backs to go off the board. So that proves the talent that he has. And I mean, he had those 12 carries. They all came in the second half. Travis Homer is there also. Foreman is also there. You said Ebner's also there. Very crowded. It just proves to me that Khalil Herbert's the guy.
Yeah, I think that was kind of solidified this weekend with Khalil Herbert. He will be the number one. And yeah, it's probably going to be a 3-headed monster. I'm not sure that Treston Ebner will be there, but you could bet that Foreman will be there and Roshan Johnson as well. And so, yeah, I'm not sure how much upside there is on Khalil Herbert, but I am intrigued by the PPR value because I think that's where he's going to get the most of his work. And so, yeah, for me, I'm not reading into this too much about Roshan Johnson being all the way behind. It's a rookie, game 1, and he had 12 carries and got a lot of work down the stretch, and that was okay. And he also got a little bit of PPR work too. So from a dynasty perspective, I think that, he was the backup to Bijan Robinson. You're keeping that guy in dynasty. And then as far as Khalil goes, I think that he's also a guy that you take later on. I'm not sure that I'm not really running to go grab Khalil Herbert the way that a lot of people are. But, in the 10th round to get a number 1 guy, if you need some running back depth, I wouldn't pass on him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like I put him in that same area as a guy like Antonio Gibson. I feel like it just enough. Maybe your 4th running back here. You're all right. Let me complete this running back tandem that I have, and I feel like Khalil Herbert's a pretty solid guy there. Of course, versus Antonio Gibson. Gibson has Brian Robinson Jr., who's going to take a lot of those carries. Herbert, it's still a question who's going to take those carries, but he also has Justin Fields, and we know that he's going to get some rushing ability out of the backfield.
All right, so that'll do it. So next week, we're going to break down the top 40. Zach, I'm going to Broncos training camp tomorrow, so that should be fun. Yeah,
go Broncos.
Yeah, so we'll get to see Russ up close. Maybe I'll even get to ask Sean Payton his thoughts on the offensive coordinator of the Jets and get the real scoop.
One more. Tell Javonte that he can't rush back from injury. His dynasty value is very important to me.
Very important. And yes, I will make sure to make a great point to him not to rush back from injury. We're going to be back next week with a breakdown of our top 40 to give you guys the edge up top of your draft. Zach, you got any last words here?
No, very excited for the top 40 because it kind of puts our rankings into perspective.
Yeah, and excited for more football this weekend as we get into another week of preseason games. And yeah, I mean, pretty excited to see like those mid-tier positional battles and some of those rookies and how they'll come forward. And obviously we take a look at dynasty and redraft and some of those late round flyers, and I'm sure that in preseason week 2 we're going to get some of those guys that we're going to say, hey, make sure you take a look at those guys and on either your waiver wire if he's out there or in those last couple rounds.
Yeah, completely. And we'll see what happens in this upcoming week of preseason games.
All right, so enjoy the football, everybody.